Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first of our Data Science and AI for Good Fireside Chat series. Now, over the last 2 years, we have worked with a lot of students in this area. My name is Bruce Huang. I teach data science, the first course in our degree program, and then the last course, the capstone course. So over the last 2 years, when I work with my capstone students, we have done a lot of work, and we have a lot of students doing a lot of good things and leveraging the technology, leveraging AI and data science for good. Give you some examples. One of the student team worked with the NASA team and basically using AI to improve the climate change model. And then we have another team work with a United Nations NGO and trying to use AI to save endangered species and come up with a way to track the endangered species non-invasively. And currently, we actually have students working with the Canadian healthcare to come up with a way, how can we determine whether there is going to be an outbreak of Lyme diseases in the region, in the area. And the most fascinating is this term, we actually have a team of students trying to use AI and machine learning to automate the medical coding process, which is highly labor intensive. So our students over the last 2 years have been doing a lot of good things using AI machine learning for good. So we thought that it would be good for us to start a fireside chat series to introduce to you what AI can do for us. Now, when we talk about AI, when we talk about machine learning, a lot of time that we start thinking about the ethical issues, the not so good part of the leverage of AI and machine learning. But yet, AI has a lot of benefits and it's a huge promise, especially in the field of healthcare and medicine. Tonight, we are honored to have Professor Oleg Pianykh from the Harvard Medical School, and he's a professor of radiology and also the Medical Analytics Director for Radiology at Mass General Hospital. Hi, Oleg. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Bruce.
So what we're going to do tonight is that for this first Fireside Chat series, we're going to explore the opportunities, the challenges associated with AI in healthcare. Right. So one of the early research that you have done, right? And so I was looking at all the papers and all the publications that you have. And I thought this is like really interesting and fascinating that you have some early work on predicting patient no-shows in radiology, right? When I look at that, I say, wow, that's me. Because I'm always the no-show person at the doctor's clinic, at the dentist's, right? And so now, maybe can you start with that and what are you predicting? Patients no-shows.
Well, yeah, no-shows, so we call them often missed care opportunities because it's bad. It's bad for the patient who didn't show up because the patient misses the exam. It's also bad for the other patients who could have been taken during the same time. So that makes it a pretty important problem, especially when the facility or resource is very expensive and you may have a long waiting lines. So that indeed was one of the first problems we tried to target. And we looked at different factors and we tried to build models encompassing anything we knew about the patients, from socioeconomic factors to the history of previous appointments. Speaking to your point of you, for example, being probably less punctual compared to somebody else. And yeah, the research did indicate that many factors contribute to that delay or patients not showing up. And sometimes it was explainable. For instance, you may see patients who have to travel a lot, or who live in the areas with less transportation opportunities. Sometimes it was just the other way around, or sometimes it was personal. For example, yes, we did include the population of the previous history of no-shows as one of the features. And it did indicate that, yeah, if somebody has a history of no-shows, that person is more likely not to come again or not to come on time. Which, again, is a nice mixture between objective factors that we know of may delay appointments, and also personality, which is completely subjective. I can miss my appointment simply because I have a tendency of not showing up for anything. And that was pretty eye-opening. And that was one of the first examples of using models not just to predict, but to explain why it happens. Because as I mentioned, the cost of patients not coming to their appointments may be very high. And once you can explain it, and once you can model that, then you should be able to act on that. So you should either double book or schedule patients differently, or do something else in your environment using this model, which will help you to achieve better patient service, essentially. So that was the main target, and that's what we've been trying to enhance.
Well, that's wonderful, and I believe that the findings are actually helping, providing for the hospital and the clinic, and to help the patient to overcome a person like me, right? And if you can identify the factors, and that you can actually help them overcome the fear and coming to see the doctor and so forth. But the research on no-shows and improving patients' wait time, and those are operational, right? Mm-hmm. So we basically that using predictive technology to improve the operations of the hospital, of the clinic. But AI and machine learning today can do a lot more, right? And so I know that there's a lot of the innovations and doctors and hospitals use AI and machine learning to basically improve patient care. And also improve the field of healthcare and the field of medicine in general, right? Can you talk about what are some of those huge disruptions and things that's happening in the field today?
Yeah, that's a broad area in healthcare, and AI has been introduced in healthcare probably a decade ago, and so many things happened and many things failed. And both are good, because that's how you realize what's possible, what's not. When I think about positive developments, I would say, for example, AI is contributing a lot into radiology, for example, in the way we acquire patient images right now, because it enables us to speed up scanning, such as MRI scans, or to reduce some kind of dangerous side effects for the patient, such as radiation during CT scans, when you actually can use much lower radiation dose, which under normal circumstances will produce a pretty bad, noisy image. But AI algorithms can help you enhance the image, so it essentially becomes a high quality, clinical, diagnostic quality image. And that reduces, again, the side effect of radiation dose on the patient. AI has branched into developing new technologies and new devices, and how you can scan patients, how you can miniaturize something like MRI scanner, which usually is as big as this room, right? And a huge bulky device. But AI helped to reduce it to small size, which can be just rolled over the floor to the patient, and so on. So those, I guess, would be the best breakthroughs I can think of so far. Probably because they're connected with some kind of devices, so it's easy to package it with a device. It's much more challenging to interact or integrate AI with the humans, because humans are so diverse and unpredictable and subjective. So it's very hard to have AI predict what the humans should do and instruct the humans on what they do, and humans will ignore it anyway. So, but yeah, I would definitely say that AI has contributed a lot into improving the quality of healthcare on that side. And as you mentioned, on the operational side, what happens is that, operational side came second, because AI was initially introduced in the clinical front. But frankly, operational side is what makes clinical possible. If your patients have to wait for half a year to get their MRI done, then who cares about MRI? You don't need it anymore. So why patients have to wait, how we can organize the process better, how we can reduce the wait times, or at least how we can even explain why it happens in such a way. So that was a big also advantage of AI in healthcare on the operational side, is that we begin to understand not just the complexity of this whole workflow, but the contributing factors and how we can improve and intervene and change so that the healthcare is done much more efficiently.
Well, I can see how improving the operations side actually help patient care, right? And especially that you think back into the COVID days, right? The beginning of the COVID days. And we're all concerned about not having enough capacity at the hospital. And so that's extremely important. So we normally think like, well, improving operations, and that's really for the benefit of the hospital, but yet that has a huge implications to patient care, right? And so wonderful. Now, I was listening to one of the lecture that you had, right? And that talking to our students. One of the terms that you use, I remember that you said something about the importance of human knowledge mining, right? Human knowledge mining. So what is human knowledge mining, and why is it so important, especially in healthcare?
Well, now we get to the most exciting part, because as I said, AI has delivered in many areas. AI also has failed in many areas. And that's my personal opinion, probably, but healthcare is a very applied field. Healthcare also is a very practical field. In healthcare, you absolutely have to understand why something is happening. And what AI in many ways failed to deliver initially is that ability to understand what's going on. Because we can build black boxes, and they can be extremely sophisticated, and they can produce some numbers and predictions, but if you don't know why, it becomes virtually impossible to implement that in healthcare. And frankly, if you think about AI, in many cases what it does, it takes 1 terabyte of your data points and converts it into 1 terabyte of neural network coefficients. So what? I mean, what do you gain as a human? What kind of knowledge do you extract from that? None, nothing. And that was the point where, again, it kind of failed to replicate the way the humans extract knowledge. Because as humans, we build experiments. We use our knowledge to conduct more experiments, and then those experiments feed back into our knowledge. We learn something new about what's going on. So by human knowledge mining, we understand using AI to extract something that humans can understand. For example, rule models. AI can build very basic rule models or extract very simple rules, most predictive of something, of certain outcomes, but simple enough for the humans to be understood. And that's critical, because we actually discovered that during the COVID period as well, when we didn't have the luxury actually to develop any complex models or to set up any complex installations, when we basically had to solve problems like, what are the risk factors for COVID? Can you discover that, and can you pass it to the operational to the emergency room doctors now, so they can use it right now? So you don't have time to implement anything black box or sophisticated, and you also have to understand why. And when you use AI to discover human knowledge, I think that's the most promising and the most interesting area. And not just in healthcare, but even beyond. I've seen some papers, for example, recently in Nature, they used AI to rediscover the algorithm for matrix multiplication, which obviously we knew. So it was a good example of confirming that AI can discover something that we know anyway, but it also was a good example to confirm that AI can advance human knowledge in this way. So to me, again, that's the most interesting part. When AI can feed back into humanity and feed back into how we understand the reality and feed back into our knowledge and help us progress as humans.
So it was really the emphasis here is that we should not be just looking at a black box, right? So human knowledge matters.
Yep.
So is that means that we cannot replace the human? I mean, there's a lot of conversation now, right? I mean, AI and robots, and someday it's going to replace human and replacing jobs, right?
Yeah, you can replace humans probably with smartphones. As when I take a train to work and everybody's saying like that, you think about, we kind of flatter ourselves thinking that we need AI to replace ourselves. But no, AI is not going to be replacing humans, and for many reasons. But AI essentially becomes an additional tool for the humans to understand what's going on. For instance, when I talked about extracting some rules from the data that the humans can understand, think about it. It's a gigantic cut. I mean, you take a shortcut because AI can discover the patterns, which we as humans, we could have discovered that maybe in 6 months or 8 months or a couple of years, but AI can discover the same patterns in the data in a matter of maybe a couple of hours. We've seen that when we try to mine for COVID high-risk patterns. We actually discovered the patterns in a couple of days that later we saw published in 6-8 months. And that's the whole difference between what AI can do by simple brute force of computing power compared to the humans who take longer by trial and error, which is very costly. So AI can outperform humans from a computational side, but obviously AI cannot replace physicians and will never replace physicians. It's a tool. It's a nice tool in your tool set, just like anything else. It's an additional tool, very powerful tool, but you have to use to your advantage, and then you just keep going the way it used to be before.
That's why even all the innovations in the field of telemedicine, that we still need the physician there and to basically provide that human knowledge.
Not to mention that no AI company in healthcare will ever assume liability for any of their products. So physician is the decision maker still. Physician is still a person who is equipped with this tool set, AI included, but who is facing the patient, who is taking the responsibility, who is making the final call.
Yeah, this is actually very similar to, it's not just limited to the field of healthcare, right?
Yeah.
And so it's pretty much every single field that my other colleagues and in the business school that doing economic forecasting and always say that, hey, we use all kind of data and to do economic forecast, but at the end of the day, you cannot miss that human insight, right? Which is the human knowledge. That's absolutely important. Now, when we teach data science, when we teach machine learning, that our students will be writing programs and writing Python programs and that mining data and building models. But if you think in terms of applying machine learning and AI in a field such as like healthcare, because you think about medicine, you think about healthcare, this is a complicated field, right? So it will definitely require some heavy duty, complicated AI setup in order for AI to be possible, right? So is it feasible? Are we going to get to a point, or is it feasible that for human to use AI to help in making decisions or optimal decision-making strategies without the dependencies of have to deal with this complex AI installation, especially in the field of medicine?
Well, that's the most difficult part. The interaction between AI and humans is the most difficult part. We've seen the projects when we can implement some AI prediction for the humans, and the humans will simply ignore it. Say that, oh, well, it's a stupid AI box. Why should I care? I just going to do it myself anyway, the way I used to do that. So we all humans, we know this is going to happen. It happens all the time. So this is one of the principal obstacles of how you can integrate AI with a human being. And again, it's probably the obstacle in any other area, just in healthcare. So that's why probably AI in healthcare first advanced in the areas when it simply integrates into a machine such as MRI scanner, which does not depend on human subjectivity at all. But now, it's making small steps into the human integration area, and it's a tough call. So basically, the way it develops right now, again, if you want to integrate AI with a human, and you still want human to be part of that integration, or not be replaced by a machine of any kind, you have to explain it to the human. You have to simply use AI to produce some kind of strategies for this human that the human can understand. It's like teaching somebody to play chess. Think about it. I mean, yeah, instead of picking up a textbook of how to play chess, right? I can use AI, which can look at so many games played and at least give me some rules which will not make me the greatest chess player, but at least it will help me not to lose miserably. And in healthcare, it's already initial step, do no harm, right? That's the old principle of healthcare. So if AI at least can give the human the strategies of doing no harm, that's already a big step forward, and that's what AI can mine. And again, it kind of brings us back to the whole topic of organic human knowledge that AI can discover. So that's, again, in my opinion, is probably one of the best ways to integrate AI to the humans.
Wonderful. And can AI model be outdated?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That was another surprise. Well, think about AI. The whole point of AI is that you extract from the data. But what happens to the data drifts. It drifts all the time. It has seasonal patterns, it has annual patterns, it changes because something changes in the environment. It's very typical in healthcare, especially in operational healthcare, when your staffing capacity, devices may change, when pandemics may come and disrupt you completely and turn everything upside down. So obviously the model is trained on historical data, which is the foundation of AI. You cannot train it on the future data anyway. Right. Become outdated. And the old approach was, okay, in healthcare at least, I train my model, I'm going to freeze it because it's good enough, and I do not want to touch it because something's going to break it. So, and that's how I certify it, and that's how I deploy it, and fine. But what we have demonstrated in one of our studies was quite interesting. We train the models, and then we try to run this model after 1 month, 2 months, and 3 months, and we saw how the quality of this model deteriorates over time. So we call it AI aging, which is kind of interesting because if AI is an attempt to replicate human intelligence, think about it, the same happens to us. They told me that Pluto is a planet, but it's not a planet anymore because it changes. Our knowledge evolves, and the environment evolves. So AI models become outdated, and that brings another complexity that you have to retrain it on a regular basis. How do you do that? You cannot just have a human to come and kind of tweak it every time. You have to make AI self-retrainable. Well, if it becomes self-retrainable, you may run into all possible problems. What if it retrains itself wrong? What if it runs into catastrophic forgetting or anything of that nature and becomes completely messed up? So it's another layer of complexity, especially in healthcare, where everything changes over time.
Right, because in machine learning and AI, we talk about unsupervised learning, right? And so I guess you cannot really build an AI-enabled device and then just counting on it to basically work for the next 20, 30 years, especially in the field of medicine, right? And new discovery and so quickly. And so I guess we need to continue to collect data and continue to train the model. Is that what it?
Well, that brings us to the principal paradox, because to train AI, you want to collect as much data as possible. But on the other side, in any unit of time, you produce only a finite amount of data. So if you try to collect as much as possible, that inevitably means that you go further into the past, which means you start using more and more outdated data essentially to train your AI. And this is bad because this old data may not reflect the same patterns as you have right now. So it's a complex thing. Or you may have AI which initially was trained to recognize lung tumors, but in the process of self-retraining, it began to recognize brain tumors instead of lung tumors. So from FDA point of view, it's change of label. You cannot do that. From practical point of view, again, you want it to kind of update itself, but stay in the same domain, in the same area. So yeah, it's a very challenging thing. And there is still an ongoing debate in medical community with FDA and what is the best approach to that? Keep your models up to date, yet do not let them evolve too far from what they're supposed to be doing, because frankly, a lot of AI research is driven by experiments and empirical work. It's not very much like classical math. If you take all classical fields in mathematics, where people studied and developed solid theory about how stable some solvers or how systems may be, right? How they can deviate, how they can diverge with some exponents over time. So if you take numerical methods, differential equations, anything of that nature, we know how to make those things reasonably stable, because and it's also important for production. In healthcare and in AI, that theory is still lagging behind. We do not know what makes our models stable. We don't know how much models can deviate over time. We don't know if that's just a matter of having too many degrees of freedom, for example, or a choice of certain model or neural network will be less stable compared to linear regression. We definitely see that happening. We see those patterns of divergence over time or on different data samples, but that's a completely open field right now, which lacks the theory behind and which needs that to be developed.
But that reminds me one of the recent research article that I was reading, and so this is about the device that we use to measure oxygen level, right? The oximeter, and there's a particular one called the pulse oximetry, right? And which is used massively by hospitals and clinic to measure the patient's oxygen level. And if you remember, at the beginning, at the initial the outbreak of COVID-19, right? And so that device actually was in high demand, and because everyone is concerned about the oxygen level. And the hospital used that to measure patients' oxygen level. And it turns out that from that report, right, from the recent research, that device actually become less accurate as the patient's skin color changes, right? So what that means is that if you have a patient with darker skin, and that device become inaccurate, right? I mean, it becomes unreliable. Now that is very dangerous, right? And if you're not knowing that, and because you're gonna be using that device and to measure the patient's oxygen to make adjustment, right? And so that can be basically that provide wrong information to the physician. Why is that? How come that happens, right? And
I would have been surprised if it was otherwise, because we finally come to realizing that humans and patients come in different shapes and sizes. And I've seen this paper as well. And they also discovered that it also affected by patients' gender, such as males or females, or even the size and shape of a finger, or some other factors. And that's when you begin to understand again that healthcare is extremely multifactorial. You have some basic concept of average, and actually, it's interesting that the French statistician who discovered BMI in the beginning of 19th century, he was trying to develop the concept of average human, what an average human is like, the weight, the height, and anything else. But even he was looking at that time at some deviations and patterns. For example, he was trying to count in what month people are more likely to die and to get married. So, and after a couple of centuries after that, we totally realized that skin pigmentation, sex, age, you name it, blood pressure, temperature, whatever, body habits, all these factors can contribute in multifactorial ways into how accurate my algorithm can be or my device could be, into what treatment should be prescribed, and so on and so forth. But it's a foundation of medicine, and the best way to approach that is to, first of all, absolutely recognize that. Do not try to hide it and say, well, that should not be done. Absolutely recognize that and develop the models, because that's exactly what AI helps us do. it may take multiple factors into account and make it more solid and more predictable. And that's the way to go. In those devices, again, the paper actually demonstrated that some devices are accurate and some are not accurate. So which basically at least sounds promising in the sense that they may develop accurate devices which are less sensitive to skin pigmentation or age or finger size. But that's a good point. And that's also a good point for using algorithms and models essentially to develop individualized medicine. When you realize that, again, people may be young and old, different, again, weight, different height, different blood pressure. I have a white coat syndrome. Every time when I come to my physician's office and they take my blood pressure, it's always elevated.
Me too.
So same thing, right? It's a bias. So in reality, there is no average. What happens in real life, your patient population breaks into a number of clusters or a number of phenotypes, which may be related to skin pigmentation, age, and in combination of those. And that's what has to be recognized, and that's what has to feed into decision-making process. And because it may become so multifactorial, it may have so many facets and so many dimensions, many more compared to what we can memorize as humans. That's where algorithms may help, because they may take advantage of this multifactorial thing, and they can help us predict something which is making just much more sense and much more realistic. In cancer treatments, they used to rely essentially just on the tumor size. Yeah, and tumor size is a principal predictor. Everybody knows that. But everybody also knows that it's inadequate as a single predictor, and something else needs to be taken into account, whether it's the history of patient, again, gender, sex, age, whatever patient, anything. And then again, it helps tune this treatment and even make it not just more targeted for this patient, but also less damaging for the patient. Because if somebody has cancer, why does she or he need to go through radiation oncology if this is not required given the profile of this patient? So we can save also patient from a lot of pain and a lot of unnecessary and less efficient treatments if you know exactly what patient is like.
So in this particular case, the problem was discovered, right? According to this report, that research, the problem was discovered in a live production situation, right? Meaning after the product has been out there in the marketplace, it's being used, right, for live situations. So it's not like it was during the development or testing of the product. So how did this happen? Is this like means that we tested on a population, a sample that's not representative of the targeted populations or the population of interest?
Most likely that's the case. Most likely the testing sample was not representative of all diversity that you can encounter in a real life patient population. Just like the model which you can develop in a pediatric hospital will not scale up to adults, and vice versa. So again, this is why I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. But again, what they also mentioned that some of those devices are more accurate and some are less accurate, which again means that some may be invested more time into producing more diverse patient population to train those or to develop those technologies, and sensors in some use may be limited amount, or maybe the approach itself. Right. Again, may be sensitive to something and needs to be enhanced with some kind of calibration or anything like that. Again, there are many ways to overcome that, well, it's good to discover those problems. It's not surprising they exist, but once discovered, we just need to adjust and improve and see how we can fix it and just continue with a better device.
But that points to us that sample representation is extremely important when you're doing especially medical type of testing, right? Or modeling.
It's absolutely important. And what people call AI bias is not really AI bias. It's a sample bias. In the same bias may exist in classical statistics, even if you do simple, normal distribution analysis. So yeah, it's critical to have a sample which represents what's going on. I can give you another example. also kind of coming from recent COVID times. For example, they try to build a model to predict that patients discharge from ED department, from emergency department, patients who had COVID and were discharged home would die. Obviously, as a worst case scenario. And the model came out to be 99.7% accurate. And everybody said, oh, great, we have a wonderful AI model. It's 99.7% accurate. But guess why? Simply because nobody was dying after being discharged, and only a small fraction of percent died. So the model essentially was predicting that nobody's going to die. Wonderful. And that's why it was so accurate. So again, it's a bias. It's a bias or very unbalanced population so that you cannot capture the right pattern of what may be happening. So yeah, when you work more in data science, you definitely have to be a little bit more diligent in how you collect your samples and how you randomize your samples in what the models may be telling you, because you do not fall for 99.7% accurate models. Most likely it's just garbage.
Right. So now that brings to what I'd like to get your advice on is the challenges, right? The challenges in the use of AI, and looks like we just start talking about the sample bias here, right? And so what else? What are the challenges in the use of AI in data science in healthcare?
Well, they're numerous. The first comes from a famous saying that culture eats technology for breakfast, because you can invent the best AI possible, and you can publish the best AI paper possible in the best journal possible. But if you fail to implement in a practical field, and healthcare is a practical field, there are many fields where people just develop the theory, and let's say in mathematics, my background, a lot of research goes in purely theoretical areas. But healthcare is practical. So if you do not implement that, and if you not improve a single patient's life, then it's a waste of time. You failed. Simple as that. You failed. And that's the challenge number one. And the principal challenge. You mentioned the challenge of even collecting the data, or even getting the ground truth. Because in some areas, the ground truth may be readily available. In some other areas, it's very expensive or hard to collect. So if you don't have ground truth, you cannot train your models. So that's a challenge number two. Challenge number three is, again, black boxes and the whole complexity with maintenance and implementation of those devices. Because let me give an example. In healthcare, probably 50% of data is manual entry, which means it's going to have gaps, it missing values, be extremely inaccurate, and so on and so forth. How your models can deal with all that? The challenges are numerous, but again, the first probably is the implementation. And even from a practical point of view, who's going to gain from that? Who's going to pay for that, right? How we can make it organic, how we can make it run on its own in this hospital without having 100%, or maybe 100 people, 40 hours a week trying to just maintain this Frankenstein of complex installation. And if one of them goes on vacation, the whole thing will collapse, right? This is not what we want to develop. We want it to be self-sufficient. And that's a principal challenge, because a lot of people came, I guess initially AI was introduced, but a lot of people who had AI background and came to healthcare, and they believe that if they can recognize cats from dogs, they can recognize malignant cancer from benign cancer. In theory it was a valid assumption, but in real life, many of those approaches failed because the implementation side was not thought about, or the implementation side was missing, or it was simply assumed if I have a great technique, it's just going to kind of implement itself miraculously. Didn't happen. Implementation is the key.
Absolutely. There's a lot of benefits and promises of AI and machine learning. But of course, what comes with it is all the challenges and in different areas, right? And so if someone, right, our students, our data science students, they're not in healthcare, but they are very interested in healthcare, right, and wanted to apply data science and AI, machine learning skills to healthcare. What advice do you have?
Oh, well, first of all, connect to someone with healthcare background, or find some hospital or some kind of physician, somebody who can really complement the clinical side. Because in many cases, if you just get your idea from a paper, again, it may not be applicable to real life, with all respect to publications and things like that. Try to find somebody in healthcare. Try to, and that's probably the most critical suggestion. Do not start with technology. Start from a problem. You meant to use AI to solve a problem. Do not just knock on the door of a hospital saying, oh, I know how to develop deep learning neural networks. Find something I can do with them. This is not going to work this way. Nobody cares about you developing deep learning neural networks or anything of that nature. They care about the clinical problems. And if you can find a valid, really serious clinical problem, then see how AI can help. Or maybe AI will not be appropriate in this case. Maybe something else can help. Maybe some mechanical device can help. Maybe something else. But if AI is a good match for solving this problem, then bingo, you have a good project. And you have an opportunity to advance healthcare by solving something important and serious.
Wonderful, great advice. The problem, right?
The problem.
Focus on the problem. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I guess what we want to do is that when we see if we can get our audience here interact and engage with us. So what we're going to do is that we're going to open up the forum so that we can entertain questions from our audience. So anyone has any questions for Professor Pianykh? Yes, Stephen.
Yes, I'm a retired physician, and my question would be in regard to patient care, where one is addressing a patient with with an undiagnosed healthcare problem. Has AI been effective in any way? I know, and it's been mentioned in a chat someone raised, IBM was looking to see if AI would improve the quality of healthcare for practicing physicians or specialists, in the sense of being able to make diagnosis, reduce the time of a diagnosis, and lessen the costs to the patient and the healthcare system. Where does that stand, if you can comment?
Yes, Stephen, it's been developed. For example, in radiology, AI definitely contributes to this field. AI is capable of looking at radiological images and producing reports. AI models can use to predict what exact imaging needs to be done to that patient, which actually is a fairly time-consuming process and used to be done by the humans, but AI can be much more accurate in this regard. AI can locate certain structures in the images which would have taken humans much longer to locate, because in radiology, with the whole concept of early detection, some conditions and some pathologies may be tiny. And again, humans become extremely inefficient in trying to chase just a few pixels in an image which is 1,000 by 1,000 pictures and has 1,000 slices from a human body. So all this been developed, but all this also in the process of being introduced, because those algorithms just get to the point of getting ripe enough to work reliably in healthcare installations. And I've seen sites where people become more reliant on those techniques and delegate step by step certain analysis to those algorithms. I've seen the sites where people are still cautious and try to be more interacting. Let's say if AI offers some solution, then the physician has to accept, not accept, again, as we talked about, making the final call. I've seen the cases where, for example, an AI company would say, oh, well, we can run this algorithm and store the results of AI into your patient records, and the hospital will say, no, thank you, because what if we disagree with that and go in some kind of collision between what the human thinks and what the algorithm decides? And that actually goes to the whole point of black boxes. It's very hard to argue with something which you cannot understand. So it's happening, and it contributes to making the time shorter, or developing new devices. For example, when a stroke can be detected much more, in different types of stroke may be recognized by a relatively small device which can be put inside of an ambulance car. So it's happening, but it's taking definitely longer than we've been promised with all this AI hype. But for good reasons, because people start paying more attention on how exactly it needs to be implemented.
We have another question from Srini Vasa.
Thank you, Professor. My question is related to medications doctors give with a patient having multiple diseases. Somebody could have a blood pressure, a diabetic, a kidney failure, all in one single patient. Can AI be used in giving the right dose and the right prescription with thousands of medicines available in a healthcare? Because doctors have to go through a lot of literature in the multiple cases, what dosage to prescribe. Can AI help in that case?
It can. I've seen a lot of research teams doing exactly like that. I have not seen this implemented on a large scale, though. I have not. So we probably, again, in the very beginning of this process, when the algorithms demonstrate the ability of doing that, but not implemented yet on a large scale enough to go essentially into production. And that brings the same question, like, if it prescribes a different medicine, then why? Why is it so? Can I, as a human, understand why it happens this way? Or maybe, because, again, for the same reason I mentioned previously, we have not developed a good theory behind how stable and how reliable those techniques could be. So I can take it with a grain of salt. I may disbelieve it because, again, I do not know how well and how reliably it makes that decision. If somebody comes to me saying that, well, it's accurate in 99% of cases, but if I do 1 million patients per year in a hospital, then 1% of 1 million patients is a large crowd of humans. And I do not want to make mistake for this 1%. So again, to your point, I've seen those in the research. I have not seen that implemented yet.
Okay, so it looks like we have a question on the chat box there. It says, any thoughts to share around the ethics of sharing patient information in order to train AI models? Should data be made more widely available, as there is a large potential upside to doing so?
I can give an example. I was meeting one of my colleagues from Germany a few days ago, and I mentioned that we do all those operational projects looking at productivity and efficiency, and he said, you know what, in Germany, you don't even have access to this data. It's illegal. And here in the States, it's completely legal to look at this. So definitely there are different deviations on that front. What's ethical, what's not? A different story. Just to give you a few colors on how that happens, when a data scientist in a hospital is looking for data, because that's what you need to develop your models, and the assumption is, I don't want to be biased, so I don't want to handpick just a few features. I want to include as many parameters of my patients and many features as I can. You have to go through some scrutiny, and at least I used to go and explain, oh, why would I need patients' age? Why would I need patients, home address? Why would I need something else? And my answer would be, I need all this information because I don't want to be biased. I don't want somebody else to decide that I can limit my patient data only to this subset of what's possible or what's approved, and miss out a whole bunch of other factors which may be contributing to that thing. So ethics, there are standard channels in healthcare when you have to be approved by the review board and institutional review board. So there are standard approaches of how you verify that you remain ethical and you use just the appropriate amount of data and you do not violate anybody's rights. But the AI is very data hungry. AI needs to consume a lot of features. Can we, for example, anonymize? Well, we don't care about patient's identity, but On the other side, if I know patient's age, address, and a whole bunch of other features, I can pretty much probably reconstruct who exactly this patient was. It's not my goal to reconstruct, but it's a collision between how much you can keep private and how much inevitably you have to give to those models to have a full picture of what's going on.
It is a challenge that we continue to have to deal with, because every time they talk about patient data, that's you have to deal with the privacy and also regulations and policies and so forth, right? And so it's ethics and also the law and regulations.
I guess there was a paper a long time ago which demonstrated that 90% of Americans can be recognized by their zip code, date of birth, and sex, something like that. So you don't need a lot. You don't need a lot of parameters to identify a human, if that's the point of the question. But yet you need all this information to train a good model. You cannot just say, well, I'm going to give half to this model and I'm going to keep the other half private, because that may reduce the quality of your model and bring much more harm to that patient. But yeah, it's assumed that the data obviously has to stay within the hospital walls. If it has to travel outside, it has to be completely anonymized. Again, there are basic rules to solve those problems.
Got one up there that was asked earlier that in the chat room, during COVID, lots of regular patients were a no-show, scared of going to hospital. How did AI handle such scenario?
Actually, it handles it well because we had to build a model for the hospital to see when the patients will come back. What happened in our hospital, just like in many other hospitals, at some point we lost 95% of our patient volume, which basically, it was probably in April, May 2020. And the question became like, what do you do at this point? Should we just lay everybody off? Should we just stop even functioning in the hospital? And we have to build a model to predict when those patients, how soon they will come back. The model actually came out to be pretty accurate, but we used many features from mobility to how many orders they placed and things like that. So AI can handle those scenarios. From the positive side of things, those disruptions actually ideal for verifying your AI techniques, because if your AI algorithm can handle a disruption such as COVID, then definitely it's much more reliable. Yeah, so it's possible, but some other things have failed. But from my experience, good algorithm can handle something like that. It just depends on how you apply it and how you train it.
Yijing, you want to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, Professor. My name is Yijing. I'm actually a data scientist in a large hospital system. So yeah, my day-to-day work is develop all those prediction models. We have models for 30-day readmission. We also have models that we predict whether a patient will come to the hospital in the next 3 or 6 months, hoping that we can do proactive outreach, rather than waiting for them to come into the ED or come into observation stay, which will be much more expensive. So my question for you is, what's your thought and advice on how to integrate all these results from the prediction model into the clinical workflow? So currently our challenge is we put the data out there in the EHR system, so our clinical staff can see it, care manager can see it, but then they still don't know what to do with it. It's more like, oh, we know this person is coming in, so what? So like, that's our like biggest bottleneck at this point.
Because probably you're doing it backwards, and I don't mean to be critical on this point, but remember I said you need to begin with a problem. If they see a serious problem, that increases your chances to implement it significantly, because I've seen a lot of examples, and again, I'm not being critical because I committed the same mistakes, believe me. When you develop something and say, oh wow, it's so predictive, and then you come to that person and this person and this person in the department and you show, and everybody, oh yeah, great, it's so predictive, thank you very much, see you next day. Come bring something else. But they have to have this desire almost to get it solved. They have to be disrupted, annoyed mostly by this problem enough to listen to anybody who can solve it. So if you have a solution and it works well, try to rephrase it in terms of what do you gain from that. And you mentioned a few points in the very beginning of your question, how it can improve the healthcare and how it can reduce certain things. So try to come with the healthcare side, not from the model quality, but from the healthcare side, and say, hey, if you use that, it will save you from such and such trouble, and you can be more efficient and more productive, and so on.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think that's exactly the problem we're facing. We're trying so hard to sell it to the clinical staff, and I think they don't really see the value from being kind of like nudged to do it.
I've seen it 1,000 times. I've seen it with my friends who do research. I've seen it with startups who just grab some kind of neural network algorithm, train it. It's highly predictive, and they come to the hospital, and the hospital reaction is, so what? Thank you very much, guys. It was very instructive. And somebody will knock on our door tomorrow with the same proposition. You need to come to the hospital and almost like observe and ask them, because the models we developed in my team, I'm not bragging about the stuff, because my team was positioned to not to do research, but to be essentially like internal consultants. They come to us with all the pain they have, and they say, why is it so, and how we can make it better. And that by far is the best entry point. It's the best entry point, because if they feel enough pain, they will listen to you when you can solve that. And that's where it clicks and connects between what you can develop and what they can implement.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay, all right. And so I think that we are coming up to our time here. And so perhaps that maybe that if you want to make a comment, Oleg, on the one that says that to what extent is reinforcement learning using in health data science?
It's used just like any other flavor of AI. Reinforcement learning is used. And the models compete, and the models get rewarded for producing better results. It actually reminds me of another interesting thing in healthcare. For example, when they run out of data, especially for projects like when we have to train or do reinforcement learning, you need a lot of data in a lot of scenarios. What also happens in some projects, they try to make artificial data, which looks almost like real. For example, artificial chest X-ray. And when you look at this X-ray, at first it looks like normal, but then you realize that the bone goes, and then just breaks and continues from a different point. So again, when you run out of data and AI starts generating more data, that may be dangerous as well, and you may not realize what's going on. But reinforcement, but they use the whole spectrum of AI techniques, long story short.
Okay, all right. So, well, thank you everyone for joining us for this evening's fireside chat. This is, again, the first of our Data Science and AI for Good fireside chat series, right? And so thank you very much for joining us, and you have a good evening, and we look forward to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you all.